on top of all the guests that you've been profiling as well. So, for those who don't know yet, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. So, I'm Ling. I'm actually based in Malaysia, and by day, I'm actually a lawyer. So, I work in house in an international conglomerate. But by night or outside of work, I actually run this podcast, as Jeremy mentioned, Code. So, this is my why. And it's really a journey where I find inspiring people around the world and then ask them, how do you figure out what to do with your life? What is your why? And how do you turn that into reality? And so you've got all sorts of guests. You've got Olympians, you've got Michelin-starred chefs. I had a retired four-star general who's also the chief of army. I also got late night TV executives from the US, and also, of course, entrepreneurs and VCs.
Amazing. And for that, I've got to ask. We all know, or at least I do, that your day job is a lawyer. So I got to ask from the beginning, how did you start that journey of being a lawyer? Was it something because you love in language, or how did that all happen?
It was definitely a love of language, and it was definitely me being in a situation where I had to decide what to study. It was A levels, it was UCAS time, and I had no idea because I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. I love languages, and it just seemed like a natural thing. Everyone said, given your A levels and your interest, just do law because it's prestigious. You can always pivot, and you will never regret it. So I guess I just at that point in time never thought of exploring. It just became almost like this straight path. I just have to do law, full stop.
Interesting. And what's interesting is that, you sounded like that was a certain conception of law that you had before you went to law. So that's why you chose to do law. And then you actually started studying law at, the London School of Economics and Political Science. Could you share more about, is there a gap? Is there a difference between your conception of law versus the actual study of law? And maybe later, the actual practice of law?
Yeah, I would say the conception and the actual study wasn't that big of a difference simply because before going to LSE, I wasn't actually really exposed to the law. I did an internship, but honestly, what can you do when you're just 17? Really nothing. You can read a case, you might sit and talk about it, but even then, that kind of discussion isn't going to be substantial in any way possible. When I went to university, it was a lot of, I would say, studying and reading and being in the library and camping out there and learning concepts I never heard of. It was a lot more interesting when I went to the bar because then it's a lot more practical. You always have the same group of 10 that you attend, and you have like advocacy, you've got actors coming in and you get to interact with them, you get to do very interesting sort of shadow schemes. So I got to shadow a court of appeal judge at the Royal Court of Justice right beside LSE. I also got to, and I think this is one of my favorites, I got to shadow the Holborn police. So I deliberately picked a night shift because I just thought, why not the police get up to at night? And so I got to follow them. They raided their home. And after that, they went, you know what? We're hungry. Let's go to this bagel place and let's just have a bagel. And funny enough, that guy who runs that bagel place now, it's a family owned Jewish place and it's the most famous in London. I also interview on this podcast. And it was just a way for me to say, hey, when I was a student at 3 a.m., I went there and with the police. And that's how I knew you are a real institution because even the police have you as part of their normal way of eating at night.
And what was the actual difference, between, like you said, the study of law versus the
Mhm.
practice of law down the road from your perspective?
In a way, it's almost as though it's two completely different things. When you are studying, you're just memorizing. You're given this potential problem statement, and then you put all the cases that you study into effect. Whereas when I got into a law firm, I was a litigator. So immediately I was doing very, very different things. I had to draft statement of claims. I mean, you don't really do that apart from at the bar, but certainly not at LSE. You have to draft sort of cease and desist letters. I never seen that before in my life, and you would never use what you study at a law school into effect there. You have to review NDAs. I mean, none of that was something that I had to consider when I was studying. So I realized something that was very, very practical. I had to be aware of what's happening in these different industries that my clients was working at. And it was just a totally different world. It was as though I didn't even need to study the law apart from understanding certain basic concepts. And in a way, it made me realize that this is why a lot of people can study, say, music and do 1 year conversion in law and actually go and practice law. It made perfect sense because all you needed was the basic principles, the memorization, which is the bulk of what you do at law school, completely doesn't apply in the real world.
So for many folks, that's quite a jarring thing, and I feel like that's been echoed by many folks. And I think the joke is that then the lawyers all leave to set up a cupcake shop after that.
Or a coffee shop,
uh,
yes.
yeah, a cookie shop. I think that's at least how I often hear it. So how do you think about that? Why is there such a gap between the actual practice versus the study or even the concept of law growing up?
I think because the lifestyle is so different, especially I was told when I was a litigator, even amongst lawyers, a litigator's lifestyle is totally different from that of a commercial lawyer. Because a litigator, you are, if a client comes and says, I've got this injunction and needs to go into court tomorrow and it's already 8 p.m., too bad, stick around. You got to be in court by 9 a.m. Before that, you got to file it. You got to make sure you have all your contacts in court. And it's just this crazy lifestyle that you must enjoy. You must enjoy analyzing every single letter that's sent out because you are going to be very adversarial. That's the nature of your work. And I realized very quickly that wasn't me. I didn't want to be adversarial all the time. And it was to the point where, and it could be any simple thing. I'll give an example. Normally, you see all the glamorous parts, which is people going to court. That isn't a short journey. Fast would be 9 months from filing a claim. That's really, really fast. Sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes they inherit a 15-year case. That's completely normal. And the reason why is because sometimes the other side might think, I'm going to wait you out because I know you can't afford it. So I'm going to try and delay everything. And so if you miss a deadline by, say, 1 day or even 1 hour, the other side has the right to come and say, too bad, I refuse to let you extend it and you need to file an application. So the application is this whole cycle, which would take an additional 6 weeks just to get through. And it's just this insane bureaucracy that I realized I just didn't enjoy, but it's just the nature of being a litigator.
That's really interesting because, it sounds like a cat and mouse plus a giant paper trail
Yes.
slash
Lots of paper
bureaucracy.
trail. Yeah. I mean, you've got
Um,
to print, in a case law, you've got to print one set for yourself, one for your client, one for the other side. If you've got another, and you've got at least 2 to 3 for the judges. So that's at least 5 different sets, just, as a very basic level.
wow. Any advice you have for, prospective, people who are considering law as a career or studying law, any advice you give them before?
I would say honestly, at the end of the day, there's no way you could know whether law is for you or not unless you actually practice. But I would say that common misconception that I come across is, oh, I want to do law because I want to fight for justice, or do what's right. I mean, it's great, you do that, but that's not really the reality. At the end of the day, it's not so much I mean, the principles of justice do apply in terms of how the law is being enacted. But at the end of the day, when I've got a case in front of me, I just go, well, what does the law say? And I'm just going to apply it. That is it. There is no concept of, oh, this is not fair because I feel it's not fair. It doesn't have a place.
Ah, really interesting. And what's interesting is that, part of that, where I noticed lawyers have many hobbies, you took up podcasting as a hobby, which you obviously taken to the next level. So how did you get started as a podcaster?
I think because I realized that in my life, because I was always doing law, I only had legal friends. And I just thought, surely there must be other people out there who are not lawyers, but I have no idea who they are and I have no idea how to reach them. And this was around the time where I first discovered podcasts as well. And I was really intrigued by this world called startups and VCs. I honestly had no idea what that was, how it is to imagine. And I just thought, oh, these are really interesting people. Who are these crazy people who are willing to put up half of their net worth or their entire net worth for this dream that might not work out 99% of the time? Who are these crazy people? And so I decided, you know what, I actually really want to talk to these people, and not just these entrepreneurs, but also other people who you always see in the news, these authors that you always hear about. What were they actually thinking? What's the behind the scenes of launching a book? And then I thought, well, I could reach out and say, can I have a conversation with you for 30 minutes? But why on earth would they with this random person from Malaysia? But I could say, can I have an hour and a half with you for this podcast I'm launching? And the probability of them saying yes is so much higher. And also because I love podcasts at the time, I realized it transformed my life. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to jump straight into it. All the stars align. They are all saying yeses. Just do it and see where it goes.
What podcast were you listening already before you started?
The very first one I listened to was How I Built This by Garaz. I think most people would have heard that. And I will always remember my first ever that I listened to was actually this person. She bakes in the States. And I'm not a baker. I'm not interested in baking or in cooking. And I could not believe after 1 hour, I was so, I just loved her. I felt like she was my best friend and didn't even know what she looked like. And I had never even tasted what she did. And I just thought, wow, the power of voice is incredible. So How I Built This is how I started. And obviously it's transformed over time.
How many years do you think of listening to podcasts did you do before you started, you know, taking the leap?
It wasn't even a year, it was half a year.
Oh wow! So you were like
Yeah.
a fresh off, like I don't know,
Fresh,
pull up your
completely
Apple
fresh.
Podcasts or
Yeah.
Spotify and
When I say
half an hour
fresh, I
late.
mean, yeah, it was literally like when I say I didn't know what podcast was, I mean, when I listened to a host and they would always say, oh, if you enjoy this, subscribe to your podcast platform. I had no idea how to subscribe. What on earth is it? And then when they said Apple Podcast, I went, wait, is it actually on my iPhone? I had to actually go and do a search. That's how I didn't know. But then obviously I jumped straight into it. And within half a year, I just went, time to start my own.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that when you chose to be a podcaster, how did you get started?
I got started because I had also been listening to lots of people who were doing their own podcasts as well. And obviously, they try to sell you a course. So they will obviously tell you the little steps here and there. And I guess I listened to so much and I read so much. I had a very clear picture of what I needed and what I wanted to do. Zoom was available, and I knew all the different softwares that were available. This script was available as well. I just need a mic and I just need to send out and ask for a yes. And that was it.
Did your initial thesis, how did that come out? You know, the title, the topic focus, was that consistent from day one? Or was there like some iteration, experimentation as you try to figure out what topics or what things really interested you?
The thesis has always remained the same. And it's very much because I was also looking for my why. I realized that I couldn't imagine myself doing law for 50 years and being just that. That was my sole identity. I just couldn't imagine it. So obviously it came to the question of, well, what's my why? And every founder is always going to ask, what's the why of your company as well? So I thought that's the perfect crux of what I'm going to do to find and allow me the opportunity to ask anyone onto the podcast. I knew that content creators are always told you must niche down, niche down. But then I thought I'm gonna go the opposite way. I want to have the ability to ask anyone in the world to come on if they have an interesting story. And the why would give me that perfect in.
Amazing. And one thing you said is that's question that you had is the title of your podcast. Why is it the question that you had and have still?
Because I think I'm always fascinated by people who say I was born into this when I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I had, I think it was episode 6, this dancer with the Royal Ballet School in London. And she said, I always knew. And she always knew to the point where her entire family sacrificed everything. She gave up school just for the opportunity to audition to get into a school in London. And look where she is now. And I just thought, are these people the same across? I really want to know their answer because then I thought, well, if they all are like that and that's how they got their successes, I better figure out what on earth my why is. And so that's why it drove me.
And what is it that surprised you? Because you know, obviously, you started out and you tried it out for the first time. As you were starting out and building out this podcast from scratch and recording and everything, were there any surprises or unexpected learnings that you had from the experience?
I think my surprise came almost immediately and it was confirmed throughout the journey. And it came in episode 3. So this person called Dr. Julian Tan, he's an incredible Malaysian who's, he studied in Oxford, got first, went to Cambridge, did his PhD, got first again, went to, I think it was Bain, was a consultant, went to F1. So he was this incredible person. And the word he used was serendipity. And I had never heard that word before. But then I realized very quickly that so many people kept on saying the word serendipity, serendipity. And I realized because I also asked all my guests at the end of every conversation, do you feel like you found your why? And the majority of people would either say no or it doesn't matter or it changes all the time. And I realized that I was asking the wrong question. And the thing that tied everyone was that they were all incredibly curious to the point where they just went deep into it. They really, really put an effort, and serendipitous events started to happen. That's when the doors, the third doors, as Alex Banayan has said, started to open. That's how they got to where they are. It wasn't so much a why. Some of them do have the why, but it almost doesn't matter. It's more being led by your curiosity at every stage of your life.
So with that serendipity, cascading as one of the learnings, what other learnings have you had, I guess, because it sounds like this for you first, and then it happens that it's also for others as well. So what other
Yeah.
learnings have you gotten from exploring the why slash serendipity slash insights of others?
My learning is that it you never so this is another thing that at least two, three people have come out and said straight out. If you don't ask, you don't get. And I realized that was so true. Even now, the first question that people always ask me is, how on earth do you get these guests? And for me, it was always surprising because I thought you just ask. But I realized that most people don't dare to even ask. And when I interview some people, for instance, Guy Kawasaki, and I asked him, why on earth do you put your email out everywhere? You're so famous. You're chief evangelist of Apple and Canva, the most famous branding person out there. And you can find his email everywhere easily. And he said, well, you'd be surprised that most people actually just self select themselves out. You think that most people would email me, but actually, there's very few. And so he would almost always say yes to interviews. And I also recently had a Facebook executive on, and he also said the same thing. He said that he really respected the fact that I took the time, found an email, reached out to him, a person who normally you have to get through many, many, many layers of teams just to be able to speak with him. He said, I bypassed all that and I just asked him, and which is why he said yes. And I realized that that was very, very true. So many people I had on that people couldn't believe I managed to speak with. They just respected the fact that I had just sent an email. And I learned that you just got to try. And the last thing I want to do looking back at what I've done is to regret not succeeding in something because I never tried. At least let me try and fail, and that's fine. But I should have tried.
It's very scary, obviously, for a lot of podcasters to ask for guest interviews, right? Any advice that you have? Sounds like you've mastered to some extent the cold email slash outreach that you're doing. Any tips or advice?
I think I don't know why I don't really feel all that much fear. And it's really because it's just an email. I think I'm a lot more worried if I meet the person in real life. But at the same time, I'm also more confident because I feel it's so much harder to say no to your face. So it's a really strange balance. I think because I've got the system set out, I know what I want to say. And if you say no, then that's okay because I know that the chances are very high you're not saying no because of something personal. Just saying no because it just isn't the right time. And that's completely fine. And so I think the key is that I don't take it personally. I'm just gonna try and we'll see what happens.
You make it sound very easy. Was it
It
always
actually
easy for
is.
you, or did you get easier over time?
It hasn't actually gotten easier over time. It's just always been the same, I suppose. I think it's just an email. I think at the end of the day, that's how I say it's just an email. I think you're frozen.
Hi,
Hi.
am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, we'll just have to trim that whole
Edit.
section where I was frozen. Um, so you were sharing about how you do outreach. So what do you think for those aspiring podcasters or those who are currently a podcaster? What would you recommend be in that cold email?
I would say so I go against the trend that Tim Ferriss says, which is keep it short. I have to admit my emails are really long. So I do a short intro of myself. I also go very quickly into why am I here? And I always have a section where I show I've already done the research and I tell them this is some of the things that I think we could talk about. And a lot of guests have actually picked up and said, because I see you actually did the work before we even spoke, that's why I said yes. So that part's really important. And then the final part, which is these are the guests that I've had on. And that also, lends a lot of credibility. I had one guest who said, because I saw all these guests had come before, I believed and trusted in you. And therefore I was willing to say yes, even though I rarely do podcasts, and I give them a link as well. So it really differs as well, because I also had guests who said, I didn't care who you had on. I didn't care that you'd done the research. I just cared that you were female and you were Asian, and I just wanted to support you. So sometimes you have people like that, but other people really care about this individual part. So I just put them all in. I have had yeses, but I've also had even more no's. So maybe those no's came because they were too long or some other reason that I'm not aware of.
What is the percentage of yeses and nos from your perspective? Because a lot
Oh
of
my
folks are
goodness.
like get scared, right? So they're like, okay, so here's Ling top of a game, doing all the research beforehand, which is way more than mine. I'm gonna say, what's your hit rate? You gotta say,
I honestly do not know. I mean, I go more in terms of I have this number of interviews that have been recorded, this number that have been slotted in, and I'm going to do I have enough to tie me over for the next 1 2 months? And then I continue pitching or following up. I mean, I must have at
would you say
least
like
100.
50%? Would you say like
Gosh,
20%?
I guess the reason why it's so hard is because sometimes I really follow up. I can follow up 6 times, 7 times, 10 times, as long as I want. So these are
Yeah.
always open, so unless they don't reply. A huge portion as well would say yes, but then they just disappear.
Okay. So okay,
Or
let's go through that. So for those, what percentage of people would be like easily say yes?
oh,
And then all those who don't respond after 5 emails, etc., let's count them as no's. What is the percentage is upfront before they ghost
prob-
you or whatever?
probably 10%, 20%.
Okay, so about 10 to
I
twenty
don't
percent
know.
will actually say yes, and then the rest will be like cold. And out of the 10 to 20%, what maybe half will ghost you?
Okay, so if we were to include ghosts as well, I'll probably increase it to around 30, 40%. And then the
Okay,
actual sit book it will probably be around 10, 20%. Yeah. But sometimes a
okay,
lot of these people will be like, I would love to, but I'm busy now. Come back to me in half a year. And then
you're
half
right.
a year they do say yes. So
Yeah,
however you want to measure this.
yeah, that's amazing. I think it's really helpful because I think for an aspiring podcaster, bring on guests, it's helpful to know that someone like you, even who's doing all the work and still has more misses than hits, right? Which I think is the actual reality
It is the reality. I
for
think
outreach.
everyone I've spoken to, even the big, way bigger ones, they will always say it's a numbers game. And it really is.
Yeah. So from your perspective, obviously there's a lot of podcasters who are out there, thinking about setting up their own podcast. I'm sure you get a lot of people asking you. Any advice that you would give for people who want to set up a podcast?
So the advice that I heard from so many before I started my own was, if you want to do it, just start now, because you will always regret that you didn't start earlier. That's the number one regret. And I found that to be completely true. I regret I didn't start earlier. And the reason why I didn't start earlier, because I thought I have no idea how to record this, and I just didn't do it. And the only reason I started was because, you know what? I thought it was ridiculous that I was pausing for so long just on this one part. And I just decided to book my guest. And then because I had a guest coming in 2 days, I thought I better sit down and just figure it out. And I figured it out in 10 minutes, which is ridiculous, but it's the reality. So I would say the first thing is, if you really want to do it, just do it. And you can always take it off. You can always replace it if you don't like it. You can always stop if you don't want to, but just start if you want to. And I suppose second is that podcasting isn't easy. There is a tremendous amount of investment involved, especially in terms of time. So think about it. I suppose it's not the best way if you want to go viral. I don't think a podcast has ever gone viral, But if it's something that you really enjoy, then I would just highly encourage it. But I don't think it's a medium for everyone, and I think that's completely fine. You could be a TikToker and go viral and be well known by the entire world.
Yeah. And why is it that way? Why do you think podcasts won't go viral versus TikTok? You know, what is it about the medium from your perspective makes it different for those who choose to do podcasting instead of another medium?
I think it's just because of the attention span. We are always talking about on every single creator platform how to make it short and snappy. And this is not the nature of podcasts. You're asking people to give you at least 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Whereas on YouTube, you're seeing them pushing out shorts, you're seeing TikToks, being really, really short and snappy as well. So it's just not something that is viral or visually enticing enough to make people go, whoa, what is this? And it's not easy to share as well. Again, on Instagram, share one click, share. This is like share, oh, I've got to invest, what, 10 minutes? And 10 is short for a podcast, right? It's long for most people. And then how do you find this podcast in the first place? There's so many things involved in the nature of podcasting that hasn't been sorted out yet. But I would say some of these points are why it hasn't gone viral and probably won't for a while.
And why is it then that people should do podcasts, right? From your perspective, right? Because suddenly
Mm.
sounds like terrible. Like, oh, you know, I'm doing a podcast to go viral. I'm doing a podcast to get likes and attention or so on and so forth. So, what would you say are the better reasons or truer reasons for building a podcast from your perspective?
I think the answer would personally go back to why you would do anything if you're launching a business. What is your purpose? And if your purpose, and I found this to be very true personally, is you want to build, you become a thought leader. You want people to trust and believe you, not necessarily to maybe go viral, but to spend 40 minutes, just imagine, spend 40 minutes with you every single week. That's 160 minutes. You times that by 12. That's a long time. If I'm in your ear for 40 minutes, I think you're going to believe and start thinking of me as someone to trust, like your best friend. And I personally felt that too, because I remember at the very start of my journey, there's this woman who runs this Pinterest podcast just about Pinterest and the whole thing. And this is how I found podcasts be really successful. She does it ancillary to her main business of helping people to use Pinterest to do their business. And so her podcast is all about Pinterest. And oh, if you want to, we have this community. We also have these special services. And I listened to her half a year. And even to this day, I haven't listened to her in over 2 years. I still think of her as the ultimate authority. I trust in her fully. I believe in her. I feel like she's my best friend, even though she has no idea who I am. And it's just because she was in my ear for so long, so consistently. So I feel as though podcast is a long game, and if you want to build that trust and authority and just stand out, because not many people have podcasts even to this day, then that might be a medium that you want to explore. But it does take a lot of time.
And I think there's this interesting phrase I think about when you said that, right? Which is, that discovery of why you want to do it versus why you don't want to do it. And there's a phrase called pot fade, right? Which
Yes.
is, there's a certain out that
So you paused again.
I was just saying that, there's pot fade that happens. And so I'm curious about why you think that happens from your perspective and how you would counter it.
I think so. I definitely have experienced up and downs, and it's just because it's a long slog, and it's something that maybe I would consider. Because imagine that you're doing once a week, every single week, and there is no break whatsoever. That's demanding a lot because you need to first identify who you want to get on, make sure you book them, do the research, interview, edit, release, prepare all the promo assets. And by the time you finish your first episode, it's already the second. It's already the next week, the next week. It just never ever ends. So it's really, really fast to enter that phase. And the advice I got, which I haven't implemented myself, I have to admit, is that's why people do seasons. And they would say, we're doing X number of episodes. for this season, we're going to take a break. And the break is just, for your mental health, for you to rethink, cast a new vision perhaps for your next season. And that is a way to manage it, I would say, or even to cut down and not do it as consistently. It really is a question of, what kind of resources you have and what your lifestyle is like.
And that's interesting because it sounds like there's a lot of personal energy that happens there, right? And I've noticed that myself. I always tell people like, yeah, I have 3 seasons. I think my first season was again me trying podcasting and iterating and figuring out what topics I wanted to do. And for me, it moved away from leadership and a global side towards more of a bravery and with a much more Southeast Asia lens. That's what I'm a total nerd slash passion about, right? That was the first phase. And then I say the second phase was me not burning out and
Yes.
figure out the right tempo, the right format, the right guest, the right tone. And I think only on the third phase, which was like, almost 2 years in, then really starting to build out the processes and things like that to build out more stuff, right? What would you say are, ways for people to be thoughtful about how to get through that phase, right, that you mentioned? So you said take a break, take seasons.
Mhm.
Any other advice do you have for folks?
I think it does help to have other people support you. That's definitely very helpful. So if you can outsource, that's fantastic. I think it's important to find the right sort of tools to use. So I use Descript, and Descript is amazing. I'm sure you've experienced it yourself. I cannot imagine doing podcasts without it. It is a complete lifesaver. So I think those two definitely very important. The third thing I do is people tend to sometimes send me really nice messages about, oh, this episode was amazing, that was really well done, I was really inspired, I did this differently because of your podcast. I screenshot all of that and I have it in an album. And so I take it out every time I feel a bit low and go, you know what? People do listen, and actually it did have a positive impact. And it's just that little feel good joke that you need sometimes to get you going and being like, okay, you know what? Actually, I'm not talking to the wall this entire time. There is somebody out there who actually cares and does, want you to produce even more. So let's keep going.
I also do the same actually, which is I
Yeah.
also screenshot those nice little bits because I think you put them in a folder. For me, it's a Slack channel, and it's like, oh, it's so nice.
But it
Um,
helps so much.
yeah, because I think that as an art form, I also do improv, right? And improv is very easy in the sense that you're in a moment, you're there and you're present. It's just that if it's funny, people just laugh, right? So there's instant audience reaction to be like, this is great, just keep doing what you're doing. And you don't get that as a podcaster, right? Of course, you're having a deep conversation and everything, but you're not having that good job moment, right? There's no little heart
Yeah.
emojis or laughter or anything that's there as well. So I think it can make it, he feels lonely sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. So, anyone listening, if you ever have a favorite podcaster, please say something. Let us know you're listening.
That's a shout out. She's asking for love.
Yes.
Send it to her.
For everyone.
And me too. Don't forget about me.
Yes, for sure. Me too. Definitely.
So there we go. So I think what's interesting is obviously you've gone through quite a lot of all these things as you go through. Could you share with us about time that you have been brave?
I think the time I've been brave is really just. Now, I do remember you asking whether I've ever felt worried about reaching out to guests. And I said no. But at the same time, I feel that that would be an element where I felt brave as well. Because there have been certain people where I would pause and I just go, but should I really, really, really do this? What if I don't know, antagonize them for some reason? And sometimes it's just me sitting on that email and just going, okay, I would just think about it and come back later. And there are moments where I just go, you know what, this is never going to change. I'm just going to hit send and just forget about it and just fingers crossed, hope that it's okay. So I would say that those little moments have been when I've been brave. I feel that that's the biggest ones. And some of them have turned into yeses. So I feel very, very encouraged by those.
And when you send out all these things and having all those emotions, what's interesting, it ties back to your title, right? So this is my why. And do you feel like your why has been sharpened more? Because it feels like you've gotten a few answers about their why, but also like you said, you got many answers telling you that they don't have a why or they're kind of cool with it, so on so forth. So does it? So I don't know. Did you at the end come like, okay, as part of this self discovery process, or so this is my why? You have a you discovered that you don't need a why, or
Yeah,
or have
yeah,
you
I
better
feel like
discovered a
that's me.
why?
That's me telling myself, okay, it's all right that you haven't found your why, even after this entire 2 year journey and you've already released 84 episodes. It's fine that you don't feel it. But I think I'm just going to follow on what I've learned, which is I really enjoy podcasts. I feel like the hours just fly by. So that's my curiosity, that's my interest. I'm just going to go with it, and you never know what doors will open. So that's basically my approach
I'm so
and
curious now.
application.
So is it my why podcasting? Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, it's kind of almost like almost misleading, I suppose. It's like I started like this, but actually it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
yeah. Why is it that you think that's important to you still? Because it's been 2 years, like you said. There's 84 episodes. Why has your feeling or the why about why you're doing this podcast changed over time, or how has it evolved over time?
I think because I'm naturally curious about other people, and I always want to think what does success look like? Because I also want to achieve that, right? And I notice in my analysis of other people who are highly successful, say founders are the best example. They always hustle, really, really difficult, and then they have this like $1 billion, sell to Google, and then they always go through the cycle of, I finally can take a break. I'm going on become a monk and going to this mental health journey, and then they come back and they go, but what's next? And they will always just say, no matter how much money I have, I feel the exact same way. I'm not happier anymore. And they're always lost. And they always end up with the question of, but why? Why? What am I going to do next? And I thought, well, if for some reason I manage to achieve tremendous success, I would definitely encounter that question. And even if I don't, so many people are and still are questioning that. So I might as well just start this journey right now and be very intentional. And I suppose another thing I could say is that the second question I always ask all of my guests is, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? And the reason I have this question is because I had actually gone to this, I would say, memorial of this really incredibly important person in Malaysia. And I was shocked because thousands of people came, thousands, and there were people were really upset. And I realized that his legacy was right in front of him. It wasn't even you saying he's no longer in the room. He wasn't even around anymore. And you could see this outpouring of emotions and the fact that he really left an impact in society. And I thought, this is his legacy. And you can't start thinking about legacy when you're 60 or 70. It's got to start now. And what does that look like? How do you implement that? Because it should be so much more than just about yourself. And so that's why I suppose it drives me, because it's why and it's also legacy, which is a more long term view.
Why is the word legacy important to you? Because it's interesting to hear you say that phrase with a little bit more of a different inflection to everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
how do you think about legacy?
So some people have said, I don't care about legacy because it's not all about me. And I think I really like the question because it forces me to think beyond myself. Like right now, I'm always focused on what's the next thing, what does success look like? It's so easy to get a ton of vision and just care about only myself. Whereas with legacy, it can't just be about me, it's about impacting the world around me. And so it's almost as a forcing me to go, no matter what, think of the wider picture, the bigger picture, because it's not just about you.
Why is it important to you?
Why it's important to me? Because I want to know that I left an impact, and so this is my favorite answer, which I want to steal from one of my guests, which is I want to make my legacy is I want to leave an indelible hole in someone's life. I think that was just so simple and so powerful, and it means that I really did something. I suppose that's just important to me for some reason.
Do you feel like you're on track on it?
Definitely not, which is why I'm still continuing.
How do you think you'll get there? I mean, because I think it's a common thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everybody's thinking about their legacy
Yes.
and their path and their trajectory. So it's a total normal feeling. So thanks for sharing that, openly and honestly. what do you think the process is going to be to get there? Do you think it's more podcast episodes? Is it meeting more inspirational people? How are you
I think
approaching it?
I think it's definitely that. But I'm also trying to explore different avenues, talk to more people, see what else I can do. I do feel like I'm starting to repeat the same processes all the time. And I don't think I should do that. I think the reason why I started is because it's so out of my comfort zone. And since this new thing has become my comfort zone, I need to start pushing more and more and more and see where it goes.
Interesting. And you know what? You've gone through 84 episodes, so it's a lot of learnings, right?
Yeah.
Um, what would you say are some, you know, commonalities or themes of one, what to do, and two, what not to do?
So definitely curiosity, as mentioned earlier, definitely just not caring about what people think because you are naturally curious. Somewhere along the way, you'll figure it out. Somewhere along the way, doors will open. And just continue on that path. I think a lot of people will always, they've worked really, really hard at whatever it is they do, whether it's their day job, whether it is also their side hustle. And it all turns out okay. Yeah, I think that's basically it. It's really, really quite, in a way, it's almost simple. And I think that's very, very encouraging. There's some of my favorite guests are guests who now do jobs that didn't even exist back when they started, say they were in school. But if you looked at their LinkedIn, it's almost as though their entire life they have lived just for this one moment, this position. But they actually didn't know, they just followed their curiosity. And for some reason, this job appeared and it was the perfect set for all their skills.
Amazing. Wow. So, thank you so much for sharing all of that. So, I love to paraphrase, I think, the three big key takeaways that I've gotten so far from what you shared. The first is thank you so much for, obviously starting out and sharing about your reflections on the legal career, what you had preconceptions about growing up versus what the actual study of it was versus what the actual practice of it is. And you gave some good advice for those who are considering the legal profession. The second is, of course, thank you so much for sharing about the reflections of what inspired you to become a podcaster, how you discovered the topic that you cared about, and how you went about cold emailing the guests and giving us not just the intuitive bits, but also the quantitative bits around your hit rate and what to expect and how to keep persevering no matter what and avoid pod fade. So those was really interesting to talk about. And last of all, thank you so much for sharing about how your show, So This Is My Why, what you've learned from so many interviews, all the way from, Malaysia, but, kind of representing Southeast Asia and being able to collect stories of inspiration and courage from so many people across the world, from, big to small, from producer and Olympian to, bagel shop owner. And I think this is wonderful to hear you kind of like tie all of that because, at a deep way, you are not just, you know, well, I think at a deep level, you're not really doing it for the listeners in some way, but you're doing this for yourself, right? And then, but you get to
Yeah.
share, and because of that, overflow, you're able to pour into the lives of others. And I think that's really inspirational to have you share your own self-discovery journey along the way and have that spill over to everybody else's lives, including myself. So
I certainly
thank you
hope
so much,
so.
Ling. I'm definitely sure so. So thank
Yeah.
you so much, Ling, for coming on the show.
No, thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me.